Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this Finance Committee meeting of April 14th. I'd like to begin with the acknowledgement. The town of Smithers acknowledges the Gidimt'en clan and the Wet'suwet'en people on whose unceded traditional territory we live, work, and play. Unfortunately, we are not able to webcast the meeting, so we are recording it. We have an agenda in front of us. Someone willing to move approval? Council Patterson, all in favor? And that carries unanimously. There is no one in the gallery, so there is no public comment period. And at this time, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Payne. However, I did want to mention just to council before Mr. Payne gets started that the understanding of the meeting is we've done our work, that this presentation is happening for the benefit of the public. Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just put the very brief PowerPoint presentation on screen. Bear with me here. There we go. We should be able to see that now. Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, the PowerPoint presentation is very brief. What we've done here is, because there doesn't seem to be any outstanding budget items at this time, is we have tabulated the new projected tax increase. That's a result of the Budget Committee's work, as well as summarized on a very high level the expenditures and revenues for the next year. And then we will just invite any questions or comments further to that. Okay.
That sounds good.
Thank you,
You
Mr.
may
Chair.
proceed.
Thank you. And just a reminder, the remaining timeline is we will need to have a financial plan bylaw adopted, which will require two upcoming council meetings tentatively scheduled for April 29th and May 6th. So here we have the summarized version of the tax increase drivers here. You notice that the projected tax increase is down to 6.13%. I'll note the major changes from the last budget deliberation really is in the inclusion of the non-market change revenue used to offset new infrastructure costs as well as the new staffing costs, and that's in alignment with budget best practices for the use of non-market change, the strategic use of that, as it offsets, the cost of community growth, and the cost drivers are related to community growth. So it's a good use there. As well, there's been a reduced economic development budget related to the chamber, that's been reduced in the plan as well. And then the other items remain relatively the same since the beginning of the budget deliberation process.
Chris, I'm wondering if, for the sake of members of the public who might watch this presentation after the fact, if you could just, I know we around the table here know, but if you could just explain forced growth and non-market change for the sake of the public.
You bet. Yep, you bet. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the concept behind forced growth is that it represents the cost escalation required to maintain existing service levels that were in place in 2024. So that's sort of a really summarized way of saying it. If the city were to, the town were to maintain the exactly same service levels, this is the amount that staff expect would be required to maintain that. And just to explain that, I always use the example of your salaries and the town of Smithers. Most of the staff are part of the collective agreement. That collective agreement outlines increases to salaries over several years. And so in order to for that staff to be able to provide the same services, we necessarily have to increase our salaries budget. And so that's what we call forced growth. There's other forced growth factors in there, increase in utility rates, increase in cost escalation, natural inflation in materials, etc. It's not a perfect science, but it's what the staff believe is required to maintain existing service levels. That gives council the option to, if you wanted to reduce the tax increase, it would be a slight decrease in service, but it helps differentiate between existing services and improvements to services which are listed below that. Mr. Chair, is that a sufficient explanation, or did I miss anything in your request there?
No, that's perfect. And then if you could also explain the use of non-market change, just for the sake of the public?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. So non-market change revenue is essentially new tax base. So again, that's a summarized way of explaining it. So if, for instance, I really create an unrealistic scenario to describe what non-market change is. But imagine if you had 10 taxpayers and each of those taxpayers paid $10,000, then you'd have $100,000 in a tax budget. Well, assuming next year you have one new property, your community has grown, so you have 11 taxpayers, and that new taxpayer also pays $10,000. Well, in that way, you achieve $110,000 in tax growth. But everyone has experienced no tax increase, and that's why the non-market change revenue, that extra $10,000, it really should be used to offset the cost to service that new citizen. And so when that new citizen moves into your community, presumably at some point they'll use protective services, they'll use bylaw services, they'll use recreational services, your transportation services. They drive new costs in your community. They drive new costs, operating costs, as well as infrastructure costs. So the strategic and best practice use of that new tax revenue, that new tax base, is to take that money and offset it against your growth in operating or infrastructure costs that relates to that growth. And so in this way, you can see in the budget that there was an increase to your transfer to capital reserves. You need to set aside more money for new infrastructure to service new citizens. There's growth in various positions throughout the organizations: finance, corporate services, economic development, community services, etc. So all those positions are growing to service your new citizens. So we're using the new tax base from the new citizens to help offset those costs. And in that way, the existing citizens are paying for what they're driving, and the new citizens are paying for what they're driving. So it's also an equity measure.
Okay, thanks for that. You can continue.
Thank you very much. And then on the subsequent slides here, what we have is the very summarized revenues, and you'll see below it the very summarized expenditures. And this is what we call a balanced budget here. In the 2025 column, the total revenue is $62.1 million. And you'll notice in the consolidated expenditures, the total column is $62.1 million. So $62.1 million in, $62.1 million out. That's your balanced budget. The balanced budget includes things that aren't necessarily considered revenues under accounting standards, but under the legislation get included in the balanced budget. That would be like transfers from reserves. So money you've already got setting aside, taking that money and using it for some of the expenditures. Borrowing, if the MFA gives us $2 million to purchase something, those are new proceeds. Those are new proceeds that get included. And so those are some of the items there. And I've just put a comment there to highlight the explanation for some of the variances there. You'll see there's a large increase for the transfer from reserves. That's really twofold. First of all, you'll see that your capital expenditures, which your reserves fund a majority of, have increased significantly from the previous year. But also, we're sort of undertaking a new format for our transfers from reserves. Any money that we get in from grants that need to be set aside from reserves, we automatically put it in reserves right away, and then we take it out when we use it. So rather than taking those grant funds and applying them directly to the capital funds. That's why you'll see an increase in the transfers from reserves, but also on the next slide, an increase into the transfers to reserves. You see down below, transfers to reserves grew from 3.1 million to 8.7. And up here, transfers from reserves grew from 8.1 to 20.4. So it's just that's more of a formatting change than the actual variance there. On the expenditure slide, you'll have some variants that are noted as well. I don't believe that there's any surprises in there compared to the operating and capital budgets that we undertook. See if there's anyone in there that yeah, I would just mention corporate services department is growing. Corporate services in this budget format includes finance, IT as well, and there are several new positions that have been now fully phased in this budget. Some of those positions had been created and partially phased in the prior year, and they have been largely offset by non-market change revenue, as we described previously before. You also notice the capital expenditure has grown significantly. There's a few major reasons for that. One is the receipt of the Northwest RBA funds. And so council went and allocated a lot of those funds. And so having those funds available for capital expenditures has accelerated the capital program. And also the town has been very successful in applying for and being approved for grants, which is why in the revenue section here, you see government transfers, which is basically your grants, has also grown significantly. And I have to say, working through the budget process, and I mean this in all honesty, I've never seen a municipality so effective at applying for and achieving grants than the town of Smithers. And that's not only in the capital expenditures, but also in the various operating projects. So a really excellent use of grants by your staff. And that's it for the high level presentation, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, myself and staff are available to discuss any more detailed questions that anybody might have. But we thought this was the appropriate level of information at this stage. Thank you very much.
Council, just curious, is there anything on the consolidated revenue or consolidated expenditure pages that you think might need additional explanation for the sake of any members of the public who watched this presentation? Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Chair Buikema. Pardon me, just the acronym for the Northwest Regional Benefit Agreement. I just observed that we hadn't spelled that out, just in case there's folks who aren't familiar with that agreement. Thank you.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Ray.
Yeah, I saw a comment online, just somebody asking what the phase-in of positions meant, and it really was that we didn't fund the full amount last year because the position hadn't been filled for the whole year, and this year it will be. So I did see that question online, but other than that, it's a good presentation and I think fairly self-explanatory.
Okay. Unfortunately, there is no one in the gallery this evening, Mr. Payne. I had kind of planned that if there was going to be someone in the gallery that we would mingle afterwards and answer any questions that might be in the gallery, but that is not going to be happening this evening. So I thank you for your presentation and thank you for all the work you've done the last few weeks with us. One thing I've been very impressed with is how well you've come to learn the intricate details of our organization. And I'm sure that took a fair bit of work on your part. I feel like you've got a really good handle on the town of Smithers. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If there's nothing else. And Mr. Schrader and Mr. Dewar, thank you for joining us as well. And if there's nothing further, I'm looking for that motion to adjourn. Councillor Patterson, all in favor? And meeting is adjourned at 5:17. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, staff and Mr. Payne.